Live from London, this is BBC News. Iran's supreme leader breaks his silence, saying the US gained nothing from striking his country's nuclear sites and the attack was simply showmanship from Donald Trump. The US Defense Secretary insists the military operation was an historic success.
Decimating, choose your word, obliterating, destroying Iran's nuclear capabilities.
I'm Mark Lowen, live in Tel Aviv. We'll have more on Iran and also on Gaza, where local rescuers say 56 people there were killed today.
Our other headlines: the UK government appears set to make some concessions on its welfare bill after more than 120 Labour MPs signalled they were ready to rebel. We'll speak live to two of them. And workers started on a controversial project to create human DNA from scratch. Supporters say it could help cure countless diseases. Critics argue it could open the door to genetically enhanced humans. Hello and welcome to today's Verified Live. The US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has described America's military strikes against Iran's nuclear program as historically successful. Speaking at a news conference in Washington, he mounted a robust and occasionally angry defense of the mission. He also attacked sections of the media for, in his words, fawning over early intelligence reports on the strikes and suggesting they showed the US attacks had limited impact. Well, all of that comes after Iran's supreme leader appeared on state TV claiming victory over Israel and saying the US attacks failed to achieve anything significant. More on that here in a moment or two. First, though, here's more of what Pete Hegseth has been saying.
President Trump directed the most complex and secretive military operation in history, and it was a resounding success, resulting in a ceasefire agreement and the end of the 12-day war. There's been a lot of discussion about what happened and what didn't happen. Step back for a second. Because of decisive military action, President Trump created the conditions to end the war, decimating, choose your word, obliterating, destroying Iran's nuclear capabilities.
Well, Iran's supreme leader made his first appearance on state TV since the 12-day war. He said Donald Trump had exaggerated the impact of America's strikes on their nuclear facilities.
The President of the United States exaggerated events in unusual ways, and it turns out he needed this exaggeration. Anyone who's heard these words has understood there is another truth behind them. The US has failed to take action and has not achieved their intended objective.
Well, let's speak live to Mark Lowen, who's in Tel Aviv for us. And Mark, confirmation, I suppose, firstly, the Supreme Leader is still alive after this 12-day war, but very strident in terms of what he was saying, as much, I suppose, for the internal audience as to the external one.
Yeah, I think so, Matthew. I mean, a diametrically opposite view and portrayal of the impact of the American strikes to that presented from Israel and the US, as perhaps you would expect. I mean, very defiant for an internal audience, I'm sure. But would Iranians really buy it? That is the question. There are murmurs clearly of dissent at the top of the Iranian regime. Bear in mind, you know, the nuclear program that has been built over the last 30 years has cost Iran hundreds of billions of dollars in terms of sanctions. Now there's been this 12-day war. And so will there be kind of an attempt at some kind of dissent within the Iranian regime? And yet there are still doubts that persist over the extent of the damage to Iran's nuclear program, perhaps beyond its nuclear facility, especially given the fact that there are rumors that Iran has squirreled away some amounts of highly enriched uranium. There are now reports that the country will perhaps stop cooperating with the UN nuclear watchdog, the IAEA. And so, given all of that, what room is there still for a return to the negotiating table? Donald Trump said yesterday that there could be talks next week between the US and Iran, but given the amount of mistrust and given the doubts that there are still about where Iran's nuclear program go from there, is there actual trust at all? And is there any room at all for a return to diplomacy?
Mark, thanks very much for now. We'll have more from Mark later in this half hour on the developments in Gaza. But let's go back to the US Defense Secretary. He was speaking alongside the chairman of the US Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Dan Kane. He said he wasn't going to mark his own homework, but the massive bombs had hit their targets and their explosions had been seen. Have a listen.
The weapons functioned as designed, meaning they exploded. We know this through other means, intelligence means that we have that were visibly, we were visibly able to see them. And we know that the trailing jets saw the first weapons function, and the pilots stated, quote, "This was the brightest explosion that I've ever seen. It literally looked like daylight."
Well, let's speak to our North America correspondent, Nomia Iqbal. And Nomia, it's worth saying right at the start, because I was listening to the US Defense Secretary, it was another extraordinary rant aimed at the media simply for posing sober questions. And I suppose we shouldn't normalise that. But away from that, in terms of the content of what we heard, both from the chair of the Joint Chiefs and from the Defence Secretary, summarise what the thrust of what they're saying was.
Well, we certainly got more details about the attack from General Kane. He showed videos in which you could see that the entrance to the Fordo sites had been destroyed. And you know, that was something we hadn't seen before. But that crucial question of Iran's nuclear capabilities and how far had they been set back, has the US done irreparable damage, that wasn't answered at all. I mean, General Kane focused very much on the logistics of the operation and the military story, telling us exactly what happened, including evacuating Americans from the base in Qatar, which experienced retaliatory strikes from Iran. Whereas Pete Hegseth, yes, he very much focused his anger on the press. I think he was pretty insulting. He scowled often at reporters and accused them of fawning over this leaked intelligence report, which came from his own agency, by the way, which he said was low confidence, preferring to cite everyone else's intelligence but that report. And it was staggering in the sense that reporters are just doing their job, simply asking that question, which everyone wants answered, is how far has Iran's nuclear sites been set back? But we didn't get an answer to that at all. And I think the way the administration certainly seems to be looking at it is by questioning the narrative. The press is accused of not being patriotic enough, not being supportive of American soldiers. But that isn't the case at all, because, just to wrap up, if it turns out that Iran's nuclear sites haven't been set back, haven't been destroyed to the extent that the Americans wanted, the other question is, will the US have to go back in? Will the US then get dragged further into this conflict, which is, of course, the very thing that President Trump has constantly said he doesn't want?
And of course, the Supreme Leader of Iran addressed exactly that if there were further US strikes. In terms of those other comments about Donald Trump, showmanship, he said, exaggerating the damage done to Iran's nuclear sites, all of that, it is likely to needle the president, isn't it?
It will, and the Ayatollah also said that ultimately this is about Iran surrendering and regime change and what have you. And Donald Trump has denied that it's that, although he put up this post saying something about regime change, and it kind of caused confusion. But there is still a plan for the US to have talks with Iran at some point next week. We don't know exactly when they will take place or even where they will take place. We know that the Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff, Mr. Trump's man, who goes into these conflicts to try and resolve them, is on standby, basically to fly anywhere he needs to fly to. And the US doesn't want Oman to be involved. They've usually been the sort of the go-between. The US has said they want to talk to the Iranian regime directly.
Nomia Iqbal, live for us there in Washington. Thanks very much for that. Well, plenty more on that story coming up on today's programme. Let's turn to that politics story here in the UK because it's been dominating for the last 2 or 3 days. Downing Street is now saying they are in talks with Labour MPs as they try to head off that growing rebellion over their welfare reforms. More than 120 Labour backbenchers have signed an amendment calling for the proposals to be scrapped. The government has confirmed a vote on those planned changes will go ahead next Tuesday despite this ongoing row. Jack Fenwick has more from Westminster.
The Prime Minister had hoped to spend the day discussing his new trade strategy. Instead, the epic row about his plans to cut disability benefits rumbles on. Overnight, the list of Labour rebels who want his welfare reforms to be scrapped grew again. 162 MPs have now signed the amendment, 126 of them Labour. But after days of ministers saying they'd hold firm, look at how the tone at the top of government has changed.
Good afternoon.
Yesterday, the Prime Minister wasn't budging.
Are there plenty of people and noises off? Yes, of course. There always are, there always have been, there always will be. But the important thing is to focus on the change that we want to bring about.
Those comments angered backbench MPs even further.
Talking about his MPs, his colleagues, as noises off is partly why he's in the problems he's in. Noises off.
And this morning, Downing Street has confirmed it's in talks with the rebels about possible changes to the welfare policies.
All colleagues want to get this right, and so do I. We want to see reform implemented with Labour values of fairness. That conversation will continue in the coming days so we can begin making change together on Tuesday.
With 126 of his own MPs all openly undermining his authority, his government is incapable of making even the smallest changes to bring down the cost of our ever-expanding welfare bill.
A Number 10 source told the BBC that delivering fundamental change isn't easy. The welfare system's broken and that it's fair and responsible to fix it. But it's looking increasingly likely that concessions will be made before Tuesday's crucial vote. It's not yet clear what Number 10 will offer to try to stave off this rebellion. One potential option could be to change the new eligibility for people receiving the personal independence payment. What clearly is the case is that the negotiations this afternoon are far from over. One Labour rebel told me that Number 10's opening gambit had been too vague and that a compromise was far from being reached yet. That frustration from the rebels was evident in Parliament this morning.
We have spoken to our constituents and organisations representing disabled people who reject the bill because it will cause harm to disabled people and their voices have not been heard.
When they say cut back, we say cut
back! Those unhappy with the cuts don't simply want a tweak to the plans. They say too many people will be pushed into poverty and want to see wholesale change. The problem now for the government is that any big concessions they offer would likely blow a huge hole in the Chancellor's wider spending plans.
That latest from Westminster. Let's talk to two of those potential Labour rebels, Rachel Maskell and Kat Eccles, and welcome both of you to the programme. Rachel, let me start with you and I'll ask the same question to Kat. Just tell me briefly why you're prepared to oppose the government on this, potentially rebel.
Because I'm speaking up for my constituents. I've met with disabled people. They've shared their stories and about the way that this legislation will not only put a huge hole in their budgets already living in poverty, but also will cause psychological harm. I've tragically had people tell me already these discussions have set back their mental health, and tragically for some they just don't think they've got the mental resilience to get through this. We know that disabled people would work if they could work, but many people can't, and we need to look after them. They're Labour values. That's why our party is in Parliament at all, and of course it's really important that Labour MPs stand up for those values and stand up for their constituents.
Kat Eccles, the same question to you.
I mean, I would echo absolutely everything that Rachel has just said. I've heard similar terrible, tragic stories from my constituents, but equally, there's a whole load of people who do work, disabled people who are in work, thanks to their personal independence payments. And ministers and Secretary of State have absolutely failed to provide me with any reassurance of what will happen to those people if they can't meet the new 4-point criteria, because a lot of them don't meet that criteria currently. And if they don't get their payments, they may not be able to stay in work. They may not be able to pay their bills and will then become a burden on the state. So I can't see how we're helping people into work when other people may well be pushed out of it.
Let me quote to you what the Prime Minister said today. He talked about doing this with, quote, Labour values. He's also talked in the last few days, you heard it in the report, about noises off. That's how he's described some of the MPs. There have been briefings that have been talking about they have to do this because it's the morally right thing to do. When you hear all of that, Kat, what do you think?
I think it's insulting to our values. How it might be a moral case that we need to find a saving, but I think there's other ways that those savings could be found that don't involve taking money off people before we've got essential support in place for them.
Rachel, let me bring you back in, because do you get the sense that backbenchers sense an element of weakness within Keir Starmer, bruised by those local elections, bruised by recent polling, a U-turn on winter fuel payments, even talk if he lost this vote, whether it's the beginning of the end for him or Rachel Reeves. Is that partly what is behind backbenchers being pretty determined to actually see this through?
No, we are really deeply concerned for our constituents, and that's why we are speaking up, and that's why we are very determined. We cannot see, it's a brutal bill, and we cannot see how there can be concessions to the bill. Clause 1, putting up the standard rate of universal credit, we will support, but the rest of the bill needs to be ditched. And I encourage the government to withdraw this piece of legislation, and instead next Tuesday let's have a debate about the real needs and support that disabled people need. But I think what is most abhorrent in this whole debate, when talking about noises off, we're representing our constituents, and it's a real insult to disabled people to say that their noise is off. These are real lives, and we care for these precious lives, and that's why we will vote down this bill.
Kat, a final thought to you, because you will know what the government has said on this, the need to cut the welfare bill, which is spiralling. They are saying that billions of pounds will be put into helping people back into work. We know that is the government position, but we know now that there are talks going on. There are talks, indications perhaps there'll be concessions. Are concessions enough, or do you reflect what Rachel has just said, that actually the best course of action here is to simply pause on this, do much more work with disabled groups to actually find a way of making the reforms that work for government and work for those groups as well?
Absolutely. I think we need to be designing a PIP system that's radical and really works for disabled people, because what my constituents are telling me and what we've heard from people all over the country is that PIPs never worked for them, and actually the whole process is demeaning, dehumanising and undignified. So I think we really need to be looking at that process and making sure it works for people. And on a final point as well, I'm really baffled why we are combining the conversation about disabled people who need desperate support and healthy, able-bodied people who are economically inactive. These are hugely different groups of people that do not belong necessarily in the same conversation. So this bill is deeply flawed, and I think we need to hit pause on it and just look at this again in the autumn.
Rachel, just 20 seconds if you would. Do you think the penny has dropped in Downing Street on this?
Well, I sincerely hope it is, because I feel that if government continue to be obstinate and push forward, it's not the vote in Parliament that they should be concerned about. It will be the next vote in the country.
There we have to leave it. Rachel Maskell, thanks for your time. Thanks to Kat Eccles for your time. And we, of course, follow it over the next crucial days, and perhaps we'll speak again. But thanks so much for joining us live on the programme. Around the world and across the UK, you are watching BBC News. Welcome back to today's Verified Live, and let's go back to the Middle East and back to Mark Lowen, because earlier we were talking, Mark, to you about Iran, but Gaza now. We've been receiving reports of many people killed today, and also in the West Bank of clashes between Palestinians and settlers. So bring us right up to date, the latest on those elements.
Yeah, indeed, Matthew. The ceasefire with Iran might be holding, but the unrest and violence continue in both parts of the Palestinian territories. In the occupied West Bank, 3 Palestinians were shot dead by Israeli settlers who attacked a village called Kafr Malik near Ramallah. Our correspondent Wira Davis has been there. Wira, I understand you've now moved to another part of the West Bank where there's also been unrest. Just talk us through both incidents today.
Yeah, well, look, there's been sporadic violence across the West Bank in recent weeks, even months. Obviously not as highlighted or as obviously damaging as perhaps what is going on in Gaza, but nonetheless, ever since that war in Gaza, there's been increasing violence here in the occupied West Bank. I'm now outside the village of Turmus Aya. You've got a Palestinian village in the near background, and in the far background, there's an Israeli, there's a Jewish settlement, and there have been clashes between settlers from the settlement and from various Jewish outposts coming down and setting fire to cars and buildings in these villages. In the village just up the road where we've just come from, called Kafr Malik, 3 young men were shot and killed last night after clashes between settlers who'd come down with Molotov cocktails and tried to set fire to cars and houses. At some point, those settlers were backed up by the IDF, the Israeli army. They fired live rounds towards the village and 3 young men were killed. Now, the Israeli army says they did that after receiving stones and gunfire from within the village. Villagers deny categorically that they fired. They said they did defend their houses with stones and whatever they could have to hand after they were being set alight by settlers. Earlier in the week in the same village, Kafr Malik, a 13-year-old boy was also killed, shot reportedly by an Israeli soldier. Both incidents are being investigated, say the IDF. But it's an example of the increasing tension and violence in the occupied West Bank. More than 900 people have been killed here in Israeli military activity since the start of the Gaza war. 35 Israelis have also been killed in violence here in the West Bank. Settlers are feeling increasingly emboldened. Only last month, the Israeli government approved the building of 22 new settlements. Those settlements are, of course, regarded as illegal under international law because they're being built on occupied Palestinian land. But Israeli government ministers, particularly those on the far right, often support the actions of settlers and support the ultimate goal of settlers, which is to annex the Palestinian West Bank.
Wira Davis in the West Bank, thanks very much indeed. Well, let's move to Gaza now, because the Hamas-controlled civil defense agency there say that 56 people have been killed there since yesterday. Among them, a spokesperson said 4 of those were waiting to collect aid. 9 of the victims were in a school in Gaza City hosting those displaced by the conflict. Israel is yet to comment. Well, let's speak to Ghada Al-Haddad, media and communications officer for Oxfam. She's in Deir al-Balah in Gaza. Ghada, thanks very much indeed for talking to us. How would you describe the situation on the ground in Gaza right now?
Thank you so much for having me. Right now, life in Gaza is defined by survival. Just a few hours ago, an Israeli airstrike hit in the middle of Deir al-Balah, a few kilometers away from where I am right now, claiming the lives of 17 people all at once and leaving others being injured. We are living under unimaginable conditions. Many people in Gaza are without homes right now, without clean water, without electricity, and without access to food. Families are crowded in shelters or in makeshift tent camps with no privacy, with no sanitation, and with no safety. And the threat of Israeli airstrikes and bombing is constant. And even the humanitarian aid is either militarized or blocked from getting into the Gaza Strip. What is happening in Gaza right now is not any crisis. It's a manufactured humanitarian catastrophe. People are starving. People are approaching us at Oxfam asking for food. Hospitals are overwhelmed with injuries, or they are non-functional, and the children are starving, and children are not able to go to school. And every day in Gaza is just trying to stay alive, or making the best to stay alive and not being hit by an Israeli airstrike or any bombardment.
Meanwhile, Ghada, the Israeli authorities say that they are blocking any entry of aid for another 2 days to try to stop Hamas from looting aid, which is what they accuse Hamas of doing. Are you seeing another aid blockade now by Israel?
Since the beginning of the war in Gaza, Israel has used food as a weapon of war. Israel has blocked the food entry into the Gaza Strip. It blocked the food aid into the Gaza Strip, and it used starvation as a policy and as a tactic of war in the Gaza Strip. So that's why people are starving. Most of the people in the Gaza Strip, according to IPC reports, face acute malnutrition due to the lack of food supplies in the Gaza Strip. And adding to this, there are no agricultural or no sufficient agricultural lands in the Gaza Strip because they are bombed during Israeli incursions or during Israeli airstrikes. So Palestinians are not allowed to get food aids from abroad, and they are not allowed to produce their own food. We at Oxfam have hundreds of aid trucks stuck at our warehouses in neighbor countries, in Jordan and in Cairo, but we are not able to bring them here to Gaza. And this is not the case for Oxfam only, but it's also the case for many INGOs, and it is also the case for many UN agencies. So this means this is a deprivation of the Palestinian. This is also a breach of international humanitarian law, where Israel as a occupying power.
Ghada Al-Haddad, I'm going to have to jump in because we are running out of time, but thank you very much indeed. Matthew, back to you in London.
Mark, thanks very much. More from Mark in the region in the next little while. Here on the programme coming up, I'll be in the newsroom assessing what we've heard from the US Defence Secretary, talking to Mikey Kay from the Security Brief. We'll also get the latest from BBC Persian after Iran's Supreme Leader making that first TV appearance. So we'll have analysis on both of those major elements. Those are main planks of stories that we're following here on BBC News. Welcome back to BBC News. Let's turn to our main headlines here. Historically successful, the US Defense Secretary gives his assessment on US strikes on Iran's nuclear sites.
Decimating, choose your word, obliterating, destroying Iran's nuclear capabilities.
But Iran's supreme leader says the operation was pure showmanship, which accomplished nothing. Well, here on the programme in the next few minutes, we'll go through the latest analysis with Mikey Kay from the Security Brief. Our other headline, Sir Keir Starmer appears set to make some concessions on his welfare bill after more than 120 Labour MPs signed an amendment calling for proposed welfare changes to be scrapped. And an emotional first interview with the BBC racing commentator John Hunt, whose wife and two of his daughters were murdered last July. Well, all of that is coming up here on the programme in the next few minutes. First, all the sports news. Tanya is here, and good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Matthew. We'll start with football, and Cristiano Ronaldo has signed a new 2-year contract with Al Nassr. That means he will stay with the Saudi Pro League club until beyond his 42nd birthday. Ronaldo joined the Riyadh-based team in December 2022 after leaving Manchester United in rather acrimonious circumstances. His previous Al Nassr deal had been due to expire at the end of June. In a post on X, Ronaldo wrote, "A new chapter begins. Same passion, same dream. Let's make history together." Liverpool have confirmed the signing of left-back Milos Kerkez from Bournemouth in a deal worth £40 million, taking their summer spending to £170 million. The 21-year-old Hungary international has signed a 5-year contract with the Reds and is Liverpool's third major signing of the transfer window, following the arrivals of Florian Wirtz and Jeremy Frimpong, both from Bayer Leverkusen. To the FIFA Club World Cup, where the final 4 group stage fixtures take place on Thursday. Real Madrid face RB Salzburg, where the winner will top Group H, while Al Hilal will progress with a win plus a defeat for either of the 2 European sides. In the earlier kick-offs, Juventus and Manchester City face each other to determine who will finish top in Group G.
Now start the real opponent for us. Not a real. I respect a lot with that and the team from UAE, Al Ain, but of course now start the teams like, of course, Juventus is a big name, and of course if in the last 16 whatever opponent we're going to face will be tough. The important is that when we arrive here to be the next stage, we'll make the first step, and now hopefully we can improve. We are away from our best. There are many things we have to improve. Even the 6-0 result, there are things that still we are not doing well, but it's completely normal right now. Hopefully every game we can do better and better, to improve.
To tennis, as the build-up to Wimbledon continues at the Eastbourne Open, the 3rd seed Jakub Mensik is in quarter-final action against the 6th seed Alejandro Davidovich Fokina. Fokina got the early break of serve in the first set. It's currently 2-4. In the women's quarterfinals, Diana Yastremska is taking on Alexandra Ela. Ela took the first set with ease, 6-1, and it's Ela a break-up in the second. Jofra Archer has been named in England's 14-man squad for the second test against India, which starts on Wednesday. The 30-year-old hasn't played a test match due to a series of injuries since 2021. Archer returned to red ball cricket this week for the first time in more than 1,500 days with his county Sussex. He took 1 wicket from his 18 overs. Hooker Dan Sheehan will captain the British and Irish Lions in their match against the Western Force after head coach Andy Farrell made 13 changes from the team that lost to Argentina in Dublin last Friday. Sheehan leads the Lions in place of tour captain Maro Itoje and is one of 8 Irish players in the starting 15 and one of 9 making their debuts for the Lions in Perth. Scotland fly half Finn Russell makes his first start of the tour. Sione Tuipulotu and Tadhg Beirne are the only 2 players retained from the team that started in Dublin.
The guys that are taking the field this week are a little bit fortunate in the sense that they understand how we want to get better. They've got to take responsibility for that and grab a hold of their chance to make sure that they take this team forward.
And finally to the NBA, where the Dallas Mavericks selected Cooper Flagg as the #1 pick in the 2025 draft. Flagg, who doesn't turn 19 until December, was widely considered the top prospect in this draft class and was described by the Dallas general manager Nico Harrison as a generational talent and a once-in-a-lifetime chance. That's quite some description for the young man. Those are your sports headlines from BBC News.
Welcome back to Verified Live. For the next few minutes, we are in the heart of the newsroom, our new area here, where we're going to tap into some of the BBC's expert knowledge. We've been listening to the US Defence Secretary again repeating that Iran's nuclear programme has been obliterated. Another broadside from him aimed at the media for reporting that leaked Pentagon assessment that perhaps that wasn't necessarily the case. Throw into the mix also Iran's Supreme Leader, his first statement saying that Donald Trump had been exaggerating and that no significant areas of the nuclear programme had been hit. Well, let's discuss all of this with Mikey Kay from the Security Brief, who is here with me. Mikey, welcome here to the programme. We'll talk in a minute about how much damage was done, but Pete Hegseth cloaking a lot of his comments that we were hearing around the brilliance of the military operation. What was your assessment of that?
Yeah, I think, Pete Hegseth's comments are one thing. I think you get more nuance from General Kane, who's the Joint Chiefs. So I think, from a pure military perspective, we've had General Kane talking about computer modelling prior to the actual strike, weaponeering, the planning and logistics of getting those aircraft over the target. And with the type of ordnance that was used, which we've never seen used before. So I don't think in my 30 years of counter-terrorism, counterinsurgency and warfare, Matthew, we haven't seen anything like this before. But let's take a look at a graphic of what in military parlance we call the scheme of manoeuvre. This graphic basically shows that it was a 37-hour mission. It involved 125 aircraft with US B-2 stealth bombers, strategic bombers flying from Missouri in the US direct to their target, dropping 14 GBU-57s, or the Massive Ordnance Penetrator, the MOP, as they've been calling it. This is a GPS-guided weapon, Matthew, with a 30,000-pound warhead. And then, on top of that, you've got a decoy element, which saw B-2s flying west to forward operating bases, just to confuse the Iranian leadership.
And you were saying to me before that you hadn't seen something like this since way back, an operation in the Falklands.
Yeah, Black Buck, 16-hour mission, so half of the length that the B-2s had. But ultimately, when you look at the bomb damage assessment on Port Stanley runway, the weapons weren't precision guided, and actually, they only just struck the target. They didn't make the target inoperable. So there are actually some comparisons that can be drawn from that. But in terms of what we saw with the B-2s and the packages that were involved, this is something that, in my experience, hasn't been conducted before.
Let's talk about that in more detail. The basic effectiveness, the assessment, because Donald Trump is claiming that they have wiped out Iran's nuclear capability. In terms of your assessment and the various assessments, take me through it.
Yeah, Donald Trump's using the word obliterated. In military parlance, it's way more nuanced than that. We use degrade, deter, destroy. And I think when you listen to General Kane from the Joint Chiefs, I think his assessment is more in detail and probably more representative of the accuracy of the bomb damage assessment. But going to this Pentagon leak, that indicated that the Iranian nuclear program, rather than being obliterated, has been set back 2-3 months tops. Today, we've got the Ayatollah saying, quote, US hit nuclear sites but couldn't achieve much. Again, a lot of rhetoric involved here. But there are critical unknown elements that are required to make an accurate assessment of how the Iran enrichment program has been treated. So let's take a look at the Fordo enrichment site. What you can see here is, what stands out, Matthew, is just the topography of it, the fortification of that site and how difficult it is to be able to penetrate that and have a successful degradation of the enrichment facilities. Big questions I've got, though, looking at that is, were the centrifuges, over 2,000 in the enrichment halls, which are about 200 feet underground, were they there in the first place, or had they been moved? If I was the Iranian leadership, I'd have moved them a long time ago in anticipation. What was the location of the 400 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium-235 that the IAEA had reported last month in May? If we look at a satellite image of the bomb damage assessment, what you can see here are the strikes of the GBU-57. Now, they're in a nice grouping, which means they're GPS guided. It means they fell where they wanted to fall. But, you know, without understanding all of these points, without this information, how can you assess really what Iran's ability is to keep enriching?
Yes, you need boots on the ground, you need inspectors. It was so interesting listening to Donald Trump yesterday saying because of all that damage on the surface, it must be obliterated underneath. And that's a huge leap between A and B. Exactly, how do we know? Now, of course, huge focus on Iran's nuclear threat and all of what we've seen over the past few weeks. We've also seen that summit at NATO yesterday, with various countries committing to spending more on defence because of Russia, and that includes nuclear. Now, the UK are going to buy 12 F-35As. Your assessment of the significance of that?
Yeah, the A bit's really important. The B, which the UK already have, is the STOL variant, short take-off and landing. The A is effectively a normal fixed-wing aircraft that has to use a runway, but it does have extended range and it can carry more. So what the UK's done is the UK has assessed and looked at Russia's nuclear arsenal. It's looked at just how much of that nuclear arsenal is what's called low yield, so tactical nuclear capability. It's identified a gap in its own capability between the Tomahawk land attack missile, a cruise missile, and Trident, which is the strategic nuclear deterrent, and it's gone, we need to plug that. We need to be able to contribute to NATO's sort of nuclear deterrent on that, if you like. But what's interesting is the tactical nuclear bombs that these UK jets will carry. These will be from the US, and this is really important because they rely on what's called a dual key protocol. That means that in order for the UK to use this as a deterrent, it has to have the permission of the United States. And what's really important here is that in a moment where Europe is starting to move away from the US in terms of capability, trying to isolate itself from the US, looking at the confidence of the Trump administration to support any further Russian aggression, Europe's moving away from that. The UK seems to be moving closer to that.
Mikey, thank you for taking me through all of that. If you were watching this programme this time yesterday, you will have seen Donald Trump there at The Hague. He was having a news briefing, answering questions, and within that, he actually spoke about talks, new talks with Iran. He said those will be happening next week. That was the first time we heard of that. Siavash Ardalan from BBC Persian is now joining me here on the programme. Siavash, the Supreme Leader has made that first statement today. Tie that into what we heard from Donald Trump yesterday. What do we know about these talks, where and when they may happen?
Well, news of the talks was delivered by Donald Trump himself yesterday, saying that next week there is a talk between the Iranian and the U.S. delegation scheduled probably, we think, on Sunday. That was the first indication we had of talks after this war and after, of course, the ceasefire. So today what the Supreme Leader says, we were looking among his, from between the lines to see any indication of what Iran's position will be in these talks, whether it will stick to its guns on the point of entitlement to uranium enrichment, or as Donald Trump made it sound very easy, look, they don't have a nuclear program. We just give them a piece of paper. They'll sign it. There's nothing to negotiate over.
And for those people who perhaps aren't aware of the nuance, that area around no enrichment, that is absolutely crucial here, isn't it? Just explain why.
The whole war apparently started over this because nuclear enrichment is, in the view of Israelis and some experts, is Iran's pathway to developing nuclear weapons. Iran said it needs nuclear enrichment for peaceful purposes. Now, the U.S., in the beginning of the talks with the Iranians, apparently was in agreement with Iran that they would allow Iran to have a certain level of nuclear enrichment. But then, halfway through the talks, they changed their mind, convinced by the Israelis that, look, Iran cannot be allowed to enrich uranium, and that's when the U.S. took that hardline position of no enrichment. Iran didn't budge, and hence the war.
Quick final thought, because there is always a suggestion that perhaps the Americans get drawn into more strikes. A warning today that if that was to happen, Iran would hit and go after those US bases.
Well, we had that episode play over again. Apparently, the whole thing was orchestrated the first time that it happened. Again, this time, the Supreme Leader in his speech said that unlike what Donald Trump said, we did, in fact, hit those military bases, and we can hit them again. And he said the attacks that the U.S. carried out, which sparked Iran's reaction against those nuclear sites, weren't that significant and didn't inflict that much damage. Again, contrary to what President Trump's saying, we obliterated the nuclear site.
Listen, we have to leave it there, but thanks for that assessment. We'll be live back in the region for more on this story here in the next little while. But around the world and across the UK, you are watching BBC News. Welcome back to the programme. Now, 2 police officers have been found guilty of gross misconduct over the strip search of a 15-year-old schoolgirl. Misconduct has been proven in the case of a 3rd officer. Child Q was wrongly suspected of possessing cannabis and searched by officers at her school in East London in December 2020. Here's our UK correspondent Adina Campbell with more of the details.
Well, this case dates back to December 2020 when Child Q was wrongly suspected of possessing cannabis. She had turned up to her school that day expecting to take mock exams, and the teachers there had strongly suspected that she was carrying cannabis. They then called the police because they had carried out a bog-standard school search of her outer clothing. They still thought that she was in possession of these drugs. That's when they decided to call the police. The police arrived, and then she was taken into a medical room and then strip searched. She was asked to expose her most intimate parts, and all of this happened while she was on her period, and no appropriate adult was present, and the search itself left her feeling physically violated. Now, details of this case were published 2 years later in a safeguarding report that said that the search was unjustified and that racism was likely to have been a factor. 5 years later, we have had this 3-week disciplinary hearing involving the 3 Metropolitan Police officers who took that course of action. 2 of them, PC Christina Linger, who is now a TDC, a trainee detective constable, the action that she took has been found to have amounted to gross misconduct, along with the action of PC Rafael Smedinsky, who was the leading officer that day. The action of PC Victoria Ray, her action amounted to misconduct. Interestingly, the hearing today has also been looking at how race may have played a part in this, but the hearing said that the officers were not influenced by Child Q's race, and this was not a subject of adultification. They said that this, the panel said, having assessed the evidence, we do not accept an inference that race was an effective cause of this incident. We see no evidence that officers treated Child Q older than she was. Commander Kevin Southworth says that he is deeply sorry to Child Q and her family for the trauma caused to her and the damage that this incident has caused in terms of trust and confidence experienced by black communities across London. He goes on to say that we acknowledge there were organisational failings and that training to our officers around strip search and the type of search carried out on Child Q was inadequate, and our oversight of the power was also severely lacking.
Adina Campbell. Now, the BBC racing commentator John Hunt says there was nothing that he saw in the behaviour of his daughter's former boyfriend that suggested he would go on to kill her, her mother and her sister. Back in March, Kyle Clifford was given 3 life sentences for the triple murder. Well, speaking a year after that attack in which Carol, Hannah and Louise died, John and his eldest daughter Amy have described the legacy of love they've left behind. They've been speaking to Victoria Derbyshire.
The Hunt family was a very happy one until it was torn apart by the actions of Kyle Clifford, Louise's ex-boyfriend. In July last year, he fatally stabbed mother Carol and shot Louise and her sister Hannah with a crossbow. Now, a year on, John Hunt says Louise and Carl Clifford's relationship wasn't coercive or controlling, despite some reports.
He never once hit her. He was in the house an awful lot in that 18 months. I never heard raised voices once.
Bearing in mind what you've already told us, was there anything in his behaviour that suggested he could have been capable of what was to come?
No. We were under no illusions at the end that Carl Clifford was not that nice of a person. You know, I want to put it very bluntly now. Did we have any indication that this man was capable of stabbing my mother, tying Louise up, raping Louise, shooting Louise, and shooting Hannah? Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
John still lives in the family home, and he and Amy both feel connected to Carol, Hannah and Louise.
From the moment I wake up, I say good morning to each of them.
Do you?
I talk to them all every day, and then as I close my eyes at night, I chat to them as well. So, yeah, very close all the time.
Always, yeah. And it's, you know, it's the three of them. Genuinely, I wish everyone could see now, but they were the best of us.
John's found support returning to work as a racing commentator.
It's Gold Cup day here today.
And the bond that he and Amy share has been vital in helping each other through the most traumatic of times. Victoria Derbyshire, BBC News.
Just a quick pointer, because for viewers in the UK, you can watch that full interview Standing Strong on BBC One. It is also on the iPlayer, but you can see the interview on BBC One from 9 p.m. Now, thousands of festival goers have flocked to Worthy Farm ahead of this weekend's Glastonbury Festival. This year's event will see headline performances from the British rock pop band The 1975, veteran singer Neil Young and the US star Olivia Rodrigo. Well, our correspondent Charlotte Gallagher is there for us.
That was She's Got Brass. You guys are absolutely brilliant. Thank you for playing for us.
Thank you so much for having us.
Deanna, you're the band leader. Tell us about She's Got Brass and what you're doing at Glastonbury.
Okay, well, She's Got Brass is a 10-piece all-female brass band. We're down one today. We're waiting for our trumpet player to get here, our second trumpet player. We have about 6 shows. We're opening the Greenpeace stage today at 11:30. Then we're going to we're coming back here for a set. Then we've got Shangri-La at Law Stage on Saturday. We've got Rum Shack at 12:30 a.m. and then we're playing on Law Stage in Shangri-La at 4 a.m. So we're going to do the nighttime Southeast Corner ride.
Fantastic.
It's great. Super excited, yeah.
And who are you looking forward to seeing?
Well, I'm really looking forward to seeing Kneecap, of course. Really looking forward to seeing Georgia Smith, Ezra Collective, Charlie XCX, Doechii, all of those great, amazing artists. Can't wait to support them. I'm also playing with Self Esteem on the Park stage, so that's going to be really fun. I'm so looking forward to that.
The problem is that there's so many artists are on at the same time, like Doechii and Charlie XCX. You're going to have to kind of try and run between all the stages to see both of them. Well, good luck. You're going to be very busy.
Thank you
so
so
brilliant.
much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you to Glastonbury-on-Sea. Sorry, I just want to say thank you to Glastonbury-on-Sea crew for having us here, our second ever Glastonbury. Thank you.
Charlotte Gallagher there at Glastonbury. Plenty more from Glastonbury through the course of our programme. I do want to point you to the website because updates constantly on our main story. The US Defence Secretary again saying it was a total success, those military strikes, and there you see underneath it Iran's supreme leader. He has spoken for the first time on Iranian state television saying that Donald Trump had achieved very little in those military strikes. More on all of that and the rest of our headline stories here in just a moment. Live from London, this is